The Second Street Dreams audio network presents Classical Music in Color. I'm Judelin Lilly. Welcome to the podcast for BIPOC classical musicians and their friends. Stay tuned for the stories, the struggles, and the triumphs of musicians just like you. And most importantly, hear the music now being heard with ears that would not hear before. You might even hear some of your friends and colleagues on the show. So stay tuned. This is Classical Music in Color. Happy New Year, everyone. Here's hoping this is your best trip around the sun ever. For our first show of 2024, the January 21st edition, we're going way back in time to 16th century Portugal and various other European locales. That's when Afro-Portuguese composer, performer, and music teacher Vicente Lusitano was composing, performing, and generally upending established music protocols of the day. This is one of Lusitano's compositions, Regina Caeli, or Queen of Heaven. It is sung by the English choral group Cheneke Voices, a black and ethnically diverse orchestral organization seeking to champion change and celebrate diversity in classical music. It's from an album coming out soon, conducted by one of my guests. His discovery of Lusitano's life and work removed his acceptance of an all-white early music European canon.
My name is Joe McHardy. I am a PhD candidate at the University of Nottingham in the Department of Black Studies and Music, and I am also a teacher and musician. You know, for me, as a black person and also like a black person of mixed heritage, it was really quite an extraordinary moment because, you know, like possibly a lot of classical musicians of my background and my identity, I kind of made my peace with not seeing myself, you know? And maybe in hindsight, one shouldn't sort of make one's peace with these things, but, you know, I certainly had. And so to be faced, you know, with the realization that actually I had not needed to make my peace.
Now, I know some of you may not be fans of early music, but Lusitano's story is as good as his music, as described by my second guest.
My name is Garrett Schumann, and I'm a lecturer at the University of Michigan, and I'm also a composer and music scholar. From what we can tell, Vicente Lusitano was born sometime around 1520 or 1522, and he was born in Olivenza, which is now in Spain, but at the time was in Portugal. And we don't really know much about his life between then and 1551, except that he became a priest. He never had a position within a church because at the time, priests of African descent couldn't hold any positions within the church. He became attached to the Portuguese ambassador to the Vatican. And so in 1550, the father and his son traveled from Portugal to Italy. So when he was in Rome at the time, he had his first book of motets published. He converted to Protestantism, which is like a really cool part of his biography, because he gets caught up in, you know, right in the middle of this huge religious conflict in Europe.
That's the Reformation. In the 1550s, the Catholic Church was still in a tizzy about Martin Luther's 95 Theses from 1517, and Lusitano left the Catholic Church to become a Protestant right around the time that many others were doing the same. Then came the debate with Nicola Vicentino, He was an Italian music theorist and composer of the Renaissance. This debate is considered one of the most famous events in 16th century music theory.
The debate with Vicentino, which is what he's most famous for, happened in the summer of 1551. And Vicentino heard a performance of one of Lusitano's motets. He used it to essentially challenge Vicentino to a duel of argument. It seems like it was more about grandstanding so he could share his unique ideas about music theory with an important group of people. So this was happening in the heart of, Roman Catholic music culture at the time. The judges, they ruled in Lusitano's favor. Essentially, the argument that Vicentino attempted to make is that no composer understood the music that they were writing. And Lusitano was like, actually, no, I do understand it. And that's all it took, because it was a bad argument in the first place. Vicentino never got over it.
And here is the music at the center of that debate, Eo me Domine, or Alas for me, Lord.
There's something a bit odd and unusual about the fact that the judgment for that debate was deferred until Vicentino's incredibly powerful patron was out of town. And I always feel that the debate was a setup, and Lusitano was supposed to lose very publicly, but he didn't. So Eo me Domine is a really interesting one, because it's quite possible that Lusitano didn't mean it to be performed, or didn't think it was like representative of his work. And he says, if you're going to write you can write in this particular way, but it would be really difficult to sing. Look, and then he writes this piece, which is really difficult to sing. What's interesting about it, to me, having spent time with the rest of his music, so the 23 motets that he published in Rome, that he published kind of as music to be performed, and also the music that exists in Stuttgart, which was his audition piece for the court at Württemberg, that he auditioned for this role and didn't get it.
Vicente Lusitano went on to write more choral music, and he wrote 3 music books for his students. He married, but his legacy did not survive. It's believed he died in 1561, since there is no record of him after that.
There's a lot of evidence from his life and documents and that sort of thing that show he was just really, really good at what he did, and which emphasizes, why couldn't he get why couldn't he have the same opportunities?
This is much the same way the life and accomplishments of Joseph Boulogne, the Chevalier, were treated 2 centuries later.
It is parallels in some ways, Chevalier de Saint George's Joseph Boulogne experience, because he was, Lusitano was in the proximity of of Portuguese nobility, of the highest echelons of the Catholic Church, but was still an outsider like Joseph Boulogne.
But unlike Joseph Boulogne, there are no paintings or other images of Lusitano.
There are no verbal descriptions of what he looks like, other than the reference to him as Homem Pardo, which is our main piece of documentary evidence of his identity. That word's use probably tells us that he had lighter skin. People who are described with that term often were the children of a Portuguese noble and a lower class, possibly enslaved woman.
But what about today? As mentioned earlier, Joe McHardy is about to release an album of Lusitano's music, and other early music groups have rediscovered him. McHardy says after some fits and starts in the late 19th and 20th centuries, it was the internet that made Lusitano's music new again and readily available. And it was the internet that provided a tweet from one of McHardy's friends about a protest over the murder of George Floyd that made McHardy introduce himself to Lusitano.
I think it's also important to recognize that my research into this is born out of the protest of Alice Jones in that moment. Like, I would not have known about it otherwise.
Joe makes a really important point about how much the internet plays a role in what we've been able to do. Like, Joe and I have never been in the same place. We've only worked over the internet.
You've never met in person.
We've never met in person.
Never seen each other's feet.
We don't know how tall each other are.
It could be.
But we've presented at conferences and university courses in America, the UK, France. If you look on YouTube for recordings of his music, there's really, it's just Hey You May Domine until like 2020. And then you see, because there's sort of this cascading effect where, like, yes, my Van magazine article was important to advertise him, but then so much other work happened that I had nothing to do with. People were like, oh, like, I transcribed a score of his, I'm going to put it up on this database. And then a choral director finds it and then performs it. And so you start to see from the fall of 2020 onward on YouTube, like, church choirs around the world, college choirs around the world, and professional choirs around the world starting to perform his music. And that's the most important thing, because if we can't hear the music, it's very difficult for it to continue to be performed. I mean, seeing the scores is meaningful, but being able to hear it is much more important.
Gerrit Schumann and Joe McHardy, experts and enthusiasts of the 16th century Afro-Portuguese composer Vicente Lusitano. Find all the links on the Staccato page at secondstreetdreams.com. For our coda this month, I'm directing you to our website, secondstreetdreams.com, for links to these events and competitions happening this month. Hampton University in Virginia is honoring composer Roland M. Carter. Composer Anthony Davis is inducted into the Opera Hall of Fame. The New Jersey Symphony is accepting applications now through February 23rd for the 10th Annual Edward T. Cohn Composition Institute. Links to all are at secondstreetdreams.com. We are the Second Street Dreams audio network, emerging beyond the white curtain. Thank you for listening to Classical Music in Color for the week of January 21st, 2024. I'm Jude Lynn Milley.